When you close your eyes and visualize the future, you want the person you strive to become. You might feel a sense of distance, as if that version of yourself is somehow far away. But what I want you to understand is this: the process of seeing your future grow can actually be effortless when you align your actions with the way your brain is wired to change. Our nervous system responds powerfully to consistent, focused attention. Every small step, every intentional habit strengthens specific neural pathways. And when those pathways fire together, they wire together, making growth and progress feel more and more natural over time. By harnessing this innate capacity, the capacity for neuroplasticity, you can stop pushing so hard against resistance and instead allow yourself to grow into that future you've envisioned. Throughout this speech, we'll explore what the science really tells us about effortless growth and how you can begin to see your future unfold, not as some distant dream, but as a process you're already stepping into right now. Our brains possess a remarkable capacity to change, reorganize, and adapt throughout life. This process is known as neuroplasticity, and it underpins every skill you have ever learned, every habit you have formed, and every thought pattern you have ever embraced. What most people do not realize is that neuroplasticity is always operating, constantly reshaping the structure and connections in your brain based on what you pay attention to and practice. That is the real power behind harnessing neuroplasticity to shape your identity. If you intentionally repeat thoughts and behaviors that align with the person you want to become, you begin to rewire your brain to make that version of yourself feel more natural, more familiar, and more real. Neurons in your brain communicate with one another across synapses, and every time you fire a specific pattern of neurons together, you strengthen those connections. This is the famous cells that fire together, wire together principle. It is also why changing an identity is not something that happens overnight. It is the result of countless repetitions of the same internal dialogue, action, or emotional state. When you make a conscious decision to practice new habits or take small, consistent steps toward your goals, you are directing these neural pathways toward the identity you want. This is an entirely biological process. The more you repeat a thought or behavior, the more robust the corresponding neural circuits become. You do not need willpower alone to change your future. Instead, you need to leverage this basic feature of your nervous system. Think of your brain as a kind of garden. Every thought you water grows stronger, and every habit you tend to blooms more vividly. If you want to become someone who is calm under stress, for example, practice responding to pressure with deep breaths and a focused mind. Even in small, everyday moments like when you are stuck in traffic or faced with an unexpected challenge, if you respond the way you want your future self to respond, you are reinforcing a network in your brain that supports that identity. And as you do this, you will notice a shift over time. What once felt difficult will gradually feel easier because your brain is becoming wired for it. Neuroplasticity is guided by attention as well. Wherever you place your focus, you drive plasticity. If you concentrate on your shortcomings or fears, those patterns grow stronger. But if you put your attention on the future self, you are cultivating seeing yourself handling challenges with ease, becoming more disciplined, more creative, more resilient. Then the very circuits that support those qualities will begin to emerge and solidify. What is equally important is to recognize that this process thrives on repetition rather than perfection. Every time you repeat a desired action or practice an empowering thought, you lay down a trace in your nervous system. With enough repetition, those traces accumulate into a network so familiar to your brain that they become automatic. This is what people mean when they say someone is wired for success or positivity. They have practiced that state so often that their brain readily returns to it. You can do the same by engaging these principles intentionally. And this does not require huge disruptive changes to your lifestyle. Small, deliberate habits sustained over time will gradually mold your identity. Whether you choose to practice a few minutes of focused breathwork each morning, spend a short period visualizing your goals, or simply pause to appreciate one thing that went well each day, you are nudging your brain toward the future you see. Over time, these small nudges accumulate into profound shifts in who you are. This is why it is so important to trust the process even when you do not see immediate results. Neuroplasticity is incremental and unfolds across days, weeks, and months. The key is consistency, repeating the right behaviors often enough that they become part of your baseline functioning. Eventually, as your new neural pathways grow denser and more efficient, you will catch yourself thinking and acting like the person you aim to become without having to force it. And this is one of the most empowering realizations about shaping your future identity. Your brain is on your side. It is always listening, always learning. By consciously choosing thoughts, habits, and emotional states that reflect your desired future self, you collaborate with your biology rather than working against it. In time, your identity grows not because you willed it into existence all at once, but because you practiced it repeatedly until it became an effortless expression of who you already are becoming. Consistency is one of the most underappreciated forces behind lasting change. Every day, people search for shortcuts and quick fixes, hoping to transform themselves overnight. But the reality is that our biology and psychology respond most profoundly to steady, repeated efforts over time. This is what truly powers growth. Consistency shapes the architecture of your habits, tunes the sensitivity of your motivation, and rewires your brain to support your goals long after your initial enthusiasm fades. When you understand this, it becomes easier to embrace small, incremental progress and trust that, day by day, you are creating enduring change. Our brains are wired to recognize patterns. Every repeated behavior lays down a path in your neural circuitry that becomes stronger with use. Whether you want to develop discipline around fitness, creativity, or emotional regulation, consistency is the signal that tells your nervous system that this skill is valuable enough to reinforce. Every repetition builds up myelin around the axons of your neurons, a kind of insulation that speeds up signal transmission and makes that particular action or thought pattern more efficient. Over time, this biological process allows complex behaviors to feel natural, smooth, and automatic. That is what we mean when we say someone has integrated a habit into their life. Consistency is the mechanism that drives that integration. And the beauty of this process is that it does not require grand gestures. It is sustained by small, regular inputs of effort. Whether you show up to practice a skill for 15 minutes a day or dedicate one quiet moment to visualize the future you want to live into, these modest actions accumulate. They create a kind of momentum that feels effortless once you have established the rhythm. That is why it is often more effective to do a small task every day than an intense one-off burst of effort. Consistency exploits your brain's affinity for patterns and repetition, allowing change to take hold on a deeper level. Another powerful reason consistency matters is that it acts as a counterbalance to the ups and downs of motivation. Willpower and enthusiasm tend to fluctuate. Some days you feel driven, other days you do not. If you wait to take action until you feel inspired, progress will be inconsistent and unreliable. But if you train yourself to follow through regardless of mood, your future self will thank you. Over time, this disciplined consistency shapes your identity. It tells you in your nervous system that you are someone who follows through, someone who can grow, even on the days when progress feels slow or invisible. In this way, consistency itself becomes a source of motivation because you come to trust yourself and your process. There is also a psychological benefit to consistency that is often overlooked. It reduces the friction of decision-making. Every time you practice a behavior at the same time, in the same way, or under the same conditions, you decrease the mental energy required to begin. Routine and habit remove the constant need to deliberate, which means you free up bandwidth to deepen the practice itself. Eventually, the habit feels less like a chore and more like a natural part of your day, as automatic as brushing your teeth or having your morning coffee. From a neuroplasticity perspective, this is incredibly powerful. Your brain is in a state of constant reorganization, and each consistent repetition provides a stable cue that this particular behavior matters. Even as you sleep, these traces are replayed and consolidated, moving from short-term memory circuits into long-term neural networks. Given enough time and repetition, these networks become the default response in your life. This is exactly why consistent practice is a core pillar of personal transformation, because every time you show up, you deepen the grooves of your desired future self. And the most encouraging part of this is that consistency is entirely within your control. Unlike talent or luck, which fluctuate and often lie outside your influence, consistency is a choice you make again and again. By committing to the process, whether it is improving your health, cultivating resilience, or mastering a skill, you leverage one of the most potent tools in your biological and psychological. In showing up regularly, you gradually erase the friction between who you are and who you aim to become. It is a process of slow, steady progress that, over time, transforms your aspirations into effortless realities. When you visualize a desired outcome with rich sensory detail and emotional intensity, you are doing much more than daydreaming. You are engaging a powerful biological process that primes your brain and body to make that outcome feel more accessible. Visualization is not a vague or mystical practice. It is rooted in well-documented principles of neuroplasticity and motor learning. Our brains do not make sharp distinctions between experiences that we vividly imagine and those we actually live. Every time you picture yourself taking a specific action, working toward a particular goal, or embodying the version of yourself you want to become, you activate many of the same neural circuits that would fire if you were performing the action in real life. This is why elite athletes and performers spend so much time rehearsing their routines mentally before ever stepping onto the playing field or stage. By seeing every movement, feeling every sensation, and hearing every sound in their mind's eye, their mind repeatedly send signals down neural pathways that will later support the real-world execution of that skill. Neuroscientific research has shown that this kind of mental practice strengthens the corresponding networks in the brain, making them more readily activated under pressure and allowing athletes to conserve energy and reduce errors. What is especially powerful is that this process is not limited to physical performance. The same principles apply to any habit or mindset you want to cultivate. When you visualize the future you aspire to, for example, seeing yourself as a calm, confident speaker, as a dedicated professional, or as a disciplined student, you are creating a blueprint that your brain will use to inform your thoughts, behaviors, and decisions. Each time you practice these visualizations, you give your nervous system a chance to simulate the state you want to inhabit. That simulation acts as a kind of training signal, priming you for action. It becomes easier to recognize opportunities, to overcome challenges, and to behave in alignment with the version of yourself that you have been rehearsing internally. There is also an emotional component to this process that deepens its impact. When you not only picture your future self, but also evoke the feelings that would come with that future: pride, focus, ease, joy, you signal to your limbic system that this outcome is not only possible but desirable. The more vivid and emotionally charged your mental rehearsal, the more you mobilize motivation at a chemical level. Dopamine, the neuromodulator most closely associated with motivation and pursuit of goals, is released in response to the anticipation of a meaningful reward. By visualizing the outcome you want, you give your brain a preview of that reward and drive its motivation circuitry to help you work toward it. This is why successful change often feels effortless once you have committed to regular visualization practice. What was once unfamiliar and daunting becomes coded in your brain as something you have already practiced countless times. Instead of approaching new situations with hesitation, your nervous system is more apt to say, "I recognize this," and to execute the desired behavior with greater ease. Even subtle actions, making eye contact, choosing the nutritious food, starting the difficult task, feel smoother because you have rehearsed them mentally beforehand. It is also worth noting that visualization can help you navigate obstacles before they arise. When you picture yourself persisting through distractions or self-doubt, you reduce the surprise factor that often throws people off track. This kind of mental simulation equips you with contingency plans and greater resilience. The process prepares you for challenges, helping you identify solutions before they become critical problems. Essentially, you train your brain to recognize potential pitfalls and respond skillfully to them. Over time, repeated visualization consolidates these experiences into stable patterns. Neuroscience tells us that regular rehearsal strengthens synaptic connections and enhances the responsiveness of the networks involved. What felt forced at first becomes intuitive. The image of who you want to be begins to overlap with who you already are. Every practice session adds more detail, more conviction, and more fluency. The end result is a version of yourself that no longer feels like a fantasy, but like a logical continuation of the work you have already been doing in your mind. By consistently engaging in this process, you decrease the psychological and biological distance between your current state and your future aspirations. You recognize that change is not some abrupt leap, but a gradual alignment between your thoughts, actions, and neurobiological wiring. The practice of visualization becomes one of your most potent tools for making the growth you want feel less like a struggle and more like a familiar, effortless unfolding. When we talk about reducing resistance with a science-based mindset, we are looking at the interplay between your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors through the lens of your biology. Every goal or challenge you face is accompanied by some level of internal friction: thoughts that say it's too hard, emotions that provoke hesitation, habits that keep you locked into familiar patterns. This resistance is not a character flaw. It's a predictable feature of the way the brain and body conserve energy and protect you from perceived threats. Understanding that can help you approach change more strategically. Rather than relying on willpower alone or feeling frustrated when you encounter inner obstacles, you can leverage a deeper knowledge of how your nervous system works to gradually reduce this resistance and make progress feel more effortless. Your brain evolved to favor the known and the predictable because novelty requires extra cognitive and metabolic resources. That's why starting a new habit or breaking an old one often feels difficult. The unfamiliar activates circuits related to uncertainty and threat, sparking stress responses that create tension in your body and mind. But this is where a science-based mindset is invaluable. When you appreciate the biological basis of your resistance, you can stop seeing it as personal weakness and instead as a signal that your brain is doing what it was designed to do. From that understanding, you can begin to work with your biology rather than against it. One practical strategy to reduce this friction is to make the unfamiliar feel familiar. Neuroscience has shown that repeated exposure to a stimulus decreases its emotional charge over time, a process called habituation. By breaking your goal into small, manageable pieces and approaching them gradually, you give your nervous system a chance to adapt. Each small success provides evidence that the task is safe and doable, which dampens the amygdala-driven alarm signals that create a sense of resistance. Instead of pushing yourself into sudden, drastic change, you use repeated, tolerable exposures to rewrite the story your brain tells about the behavior you want to establish. Another crucial insight is the role of stress management in reducing resistance. Under high stress, the prefrontal cortex, your seat of reason and executive control, becomes less active and more reactive. Habit-driven circuits take over. Techniques like breathwork, meditation, or even short bouts of physical movement can shift your physiology into a more parasympathetic state. When your heart rate slows and your body relaxes, you create the optimal neural environment for learning and behavior change. By deliberately calming your nervous system before tackling a difficult task, you help quiet the reflexive avoidance or procrastination that usually accompanies challenging goals. Your mindset also shapes your capacity to move past resistance. When you interpret discomfort as a sign that you're stepping outside your comfort zone, a normal and even desirable part of growth, you change your internal narrative. Neuroscience research into reappraisal and cognitive reframing has shown that choosing to view stress as a signal of opportunity rather than threat can improve performance and resilience. This shift reduces the sensation of friction and allows your brain to allocate more attention and energy toward the task at hand. Additionally, using an experimental mindset can help you bypass perfectionism, a major source of resistance. Treating each action as part of an ongoing trial where the goal is to learn what works, not to achieve some ideal on the first try, lowers the stakes and keeps your prefrontal cortex engaged. In this mode, mistakes become information rather than personal shortcomings, and that reduces the psychological barrier to beginning. Every repetition becomes part of a feedback loop that gradually refines your skill and confidence without triggering the brain's protective alarm systems. Finally, paying attention to small wins and rewarding progress supports the neurochemical underpinnings of motivation. Dopamine, a key neuromodulator in learning and reward, is released when we notice that we are moving closer to a meaningful goal. Even a modest accomplishment can light up these reward pathways, making it more likely you'll repeat the behavior and less likely you'll feel the kind of resistance that accompanies daunting, all-or-nothing thinking. In this way, you can engineer a positive feedback cycle in your brain that reinforces the behaviors you want to make effortless. Reducing resistance is not about forcing yourself harder, but about creating conditions, biological, psychological, and emotional, that make action feel smoother and more natural. By grounding your approach in these principles, you set yourself up to progress toward your goals in a way that feels aligned with how your brain and body truly work, and that opens the door to sustainable, self-reinforcing growth over time. Aligning daily habits with long-term growth is one of the most practical and transformative strategies for creating a future that feels inevitable rather than uncertain. Every action you repeat day after day is a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. This is more than a motivational slogan. It reflects a real biological process that shapes your thoughts, behaviors, and outcomes over time. The nervous system is highly adaptive, and the routines you practice most often become wired into its architecture. When you consciously design your daily habits to reflect the identity and goals you want to achieve, you take advantage of this built-in plasticity and gradually shape a version of yourself that naturally grows toward your ambitions. This begins with recognizing the immense power of small, consistent behaviors. Neuroscience and behavioral psychology show that habits act like automation scripts in the brain, allowing you to execute complex sequences of actions without draining your willpower or attention. The more often you repeat a behavior, whether it's starting your morning with movement, setting aside time for focused work, or prioritizing meaningful connections, the less mental energy it requires. This is because repetition strengthens the relevant circuits until they fire with less effort. That is why it is so important to focus not on big, occasional efforts, but on the small, sustainable routines you can repeat without fail. When these habits accumulate and compound over time, they become one of the most powerful forces for long-term growth. Your environment also plays a critical role in supporting this process. Human behavior is often shaped less by conscious decisions and more by the cues and contexts that surround us. By making subtle adjustments to your surroundings, placing a journal on your desk where you will see it each morning, preparing healthy meals in advance, or scheduling blocks of uninterrupted work time, you reduce friction and make the actions you want to practice as easy as possible. These small design choices support your habits without relying solely on willpower, which tends to fluctuate. By creating an environment that reflects the future you want to grow into, you are making a kind of unconscious commitment to that path every time you enter the space. Alignment also requires you to reflect on your habits regularly and assess whether they are serving the trajectory you want for yourself. This can mean conducting a simple weekly review to evaluate which habits help you move toward your goals, and which ones feel misaligned with the person you want to become. By making small adjustments based on this feedback, you stay responsive to change and prevent unconscious routines from pulling you off course. Growth is not a straight path, it is a process of fine-tuning and recalibration. When you embrace this, you shift your focus from perfection to progress and give yourself permission to evolve continuously. A powerful insight from the science of behavior change is that habits are most effective when they are tied to a larger sense of purpose or identity. This is where internal motivation comes into play. If you practice habits purely out of obligation or fear of failure, it will take much more effort to sustain them. But if you connect each habit to the person you are becoming and the future you are choosing to grow into, then the habit is more than isolated action, it is an expression of your values. This deeper connection engages the brain's reward systems and taps into the natural drive that emerges when behavior and purpose align. Additionally, celebrating small wins is a practical way to reinforce these habits. Every time you recognize that you followed through on your plan, you give your brain a small burst of dopamine, a neuromodulator that reinforces learning and motivation. These incremental rewards signal to your nervous system that the behavior is not only safe but also desirable. Even modest progress deserves acknowledgement because it reminds you that you are moving forward and builds the emotional momentum that keeps you engaged over the long term. When habits and long-term growth are aligned, they feel less like isolated tasks on a to-do list and more like an organic expression of who you are. The more often you return to these habits with a sense of purpose and care, the more they shape your thoughts and decisions in other areas of life as well. This is the power of consistency, not just to create one specific outcome, but to generate a ripple effect that enhances your future in every direction. And as these habits become an effortless part of your daily routine, you will find that the future you have been working toward begins to grow into reality on its own. Embracing incremental progress is one of the most powerful and sustainable approaches to personal growth because it aligns perfectly with the way your brain and body adapt. Our culture often celebrates dramatic transformations, overnight success stories, and grand breakthroughs. But the reality is that meaningful and lasting change rarely happens in a single leap. It unfolds through countless small, consistent actions that compound over time. When you understand this and give yourself permission to grow gradually, you remove much of the pressure and resistance that can make progress feel forced or fragile. Instead, each small step reinforces your commitment and nurtures a sense of trust in yourself that strengthens with repetition. Your nervous system is designed to respond to gradual change. Rapid, extreme shifts can feel threatening, triggering stress responses that push you back toward familiar, safe territory. Incremental progress, by contrast, allows your brain to integrate new behaviors and skills at a comfortable pace. Every time you repeat a small action, making a better choice at mealtime, carving out 15 minutes to practice a skill, or responding to a setback with curiosity instead of self-criticism, you send a signal that this behavior is part of your identity. And as you do this again and again, those neural circuits grow more stable and efficient. What once required effort and conscious attention becomes an automatic part of who you are. This gradual, steady process is also deeply motivating. Neuroscience research has shown that our brains release dopamine not only when we achieve a goal, but also as we make progress toward one. Even small wins activate your brain's reward system, creating a positive feedback loop that encourages you to continue. This is why setting realistic, bite-sized goals is so effective. Each one you reach fuels the drive to pursue the next. By acknowledging and celebrating these milestones, no matter how modest they may seem, you reinforce the behaviors and mindset that support your future self. There is also a profound psychological benefit to focusing on incremental progress. When you let go of the all or nothing mentality, you reduce perfectionism and make it easier to take action without fear of failure. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment or outcome, you embrace the practice of continuous improvement. This mindset cultivates resilience because you come to see mistakes and missteps as part of the process rather than as signs that you cannot succeed. With every challenge you navigate, you become more adaptable and more confident in your capacity to keep going. Additionally, embracing incremental progress sharpens your focus. Big goals can feel overwhelming because they seem too distant or complex to tackle directly. Breaking them down into smaller, tangible actions clarifies your path and keeps you oriented toward what matters most in the present moment. This approach also prevents the emotional roller coaster that comes from tying your self-worth to huge, infrequent milestones. Instead, you experience a steadier rhythm of effort, feedback, and adjustment that fosters sustained engagement over the long term. Over time, these small, steady investments accumulate into significant change. What begins as a modest habit practice a few minutes a day can grow into a skill you never thought you'd master, an attitude you never thought you'd embrace, or a lifestyle you never thought you'd live. This is not magic, it is the direct result of showing up repeatedly and allowing neuroplasticity to do its work. And because incremental progress feels manageable, you are more likely to persevere through obstacles and less likely to burn out along the way. This way of working also supports self-compassion. By honoring the process and recognizing that change is rarely linear, you cultivate patience with yourself. Each plateau, setback, or small gain becomes part of a larger pattern of growth. Knowing that every effort contributes, even if the results are not immediately visible, can make the journey feel lighter and more meaningful. It reminds you that you do not have to overhaul your entire life overnight to become the person you want to be. And perhaps most importantly, embracing incremental progress empowers you to reclaim a sense of agency. Instead of feeling at the mercy of luck, talent, or external circumstances, you recognize that your daily choices matter. The future you want is built in these small, intentional moments. With each one, you make progress a natural, ongoing part of your life and grow toward the future you have envisioned with ease and authenticity.